Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez had always been different from the other soldiers on Fort Harrison. While most of her fellow servicemen came from military families or small towns, Maria grew up in the bustling streets of East Los Angeles, where survival meant being tougher than the situation around you. Her father worked 3 jobs to support the family, and her mother cleaned office buildings at night to make ends meet. When Maria enlisted in the Army at 18, she carried with her the determination of someone who had never been handed anything in life. The base buzzed with activity on that humid Tuesday morning in July. Maria had just returned from a successful 6-month deployment in Afghanistan, where she had led her communications unit through several dangerous missions without losing a single soldier. Her team had received commendations for their exceptional work in maintaining critical communication lines during a particularly intense operation. The local newspaper back home had even featured a story about her leadership, calling her a hometown hero. Colonel Bradley Hartwell was everything Maria was not. Born into a military dynasty, he had attended West Point and climbed the ranks through connections as much as competence. His grandfather had been a general, his father a decorated colonel, and Bradley expected the same respect that his family name had always commanded. He stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, with perfectly pressed uniforms and shoes that reflected like mirrors. His office walls displayed photographs of him with important political figures and military officials, carefully arranged to impress visitors. That morning, Colonel Hartwell received orders from headquarters about the upcoming annual inspection. This inspection would determine budget allocations and could significantly impact his chances for promotion to general. The pressure was immense, and Hartwell knew that every detail needed to be perfect. He had built his reputation on running a tight ship, and failure was not an option he could consider. During the morning briefing, Hartwell's aide informed him about Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's recent commendation and the positive media attention she had received. Instead of pride in his soldier's achievement, Hartwell felt something else entirely. He had noticed how other soldiers looked up to Maria, how they sought her advice even when it wasn't required through the chain of command. Her natural leadership threatened his authority in ways he couldn't quite articulate but deeply resented. The breaking point came when Hartwell overheard several junior officers discussing Maria's innovative communication strategies during a coffee break. They spoke with genuine admiration about her ability to solve problems quickly and efficiently. One lieutenant mentioned that he had learned more from watching Maria work in 3 months than he had in 2 years of military training. Another officer suggested that her methods should be taught to other units across the base. Hartwell's face flushed red as he listened from around the corner. In his mind, this kind of informal influence undermined the proper military hierarchy that he believed was essential for order and discipline. He convinced himself that Maria was becoming too comfortable, too confident, and needed to be reminded of her place in the military structure. His plan began forming immediately. The next morning, Colonel Hartwell appeared unexpectedly at Maria's communications center during the busiest part of the day. Her team was coordinating with multiple overseas operations, managing satellite feeds, and maintaining contact with various field units. The room hummed with focused activity as soldiers moved efficiently between workstations, their voices calm but urgent as they relayed critical information. Without warning, Hartwell interrupted the operations with a loud voice that cut through the professional atmosphere like a blade. He announced that he was conducting an immediate inspection of all equipment and procedures. Maria quickly stood at attention, as did her entire team, but she could see the confusion in their eyes. They were in the middle of time-sensitive operations that couldn't simply be paused without potentially endangering soldiers in the field. Hartwell began his inspection by pointing out minor infractions that would normally be overlooked during active operations. He criticized the arrangement of cables, questioned the positioning of monitors, and demanded explanations for procedural choices that were actually improvements Maria had implemented based on her field experience. His voice grew louder with each criticism, drawing the attention of soldiers from other departments who began gathering near the doorway to witness the unexpected spectacle. The colonel saved his most calculated insult for last. In front of the growing crowd of onlookers, he picked up Maria's field manual, which was filled with detailed notes and modifications she had made based on real-world applications. The pages showed wear from constant use and contained handwritten additions that had proven invaluable during her deployment. Hartwell held it up mockingly and declared that it looked like something a child had scribbled in, suggesting that perhaps Maria needed to return to basic training to learn proper military documentation standards. The room fell completely silent, except for the steady beeping of communication equipment. Every person present understood that they were witnessing something far beyond a routine inspection. This was a deliberate humiliation designed to break down a respected leader in front of her peers and subordinates. Some soldiers looked down at their feet in embarrassment, while others exchanged glances of disbelief and anger. Maria stood perfectly still throughout the entire ordeal, her face betraying no emotion despite the heat she felt rising in her chest. She had faced enemy fire, navigated impossible logistical challenges, and earned the respect of every soldier she had ever worked with, yet here she stood being dressed down like a new recruit who had failed to make her bed properly. The injustice burned inside her, but her military training and personal discipline kept her from responding in the moment. When Hartwell finally finished his performance and left the room, the atmosphere remained tense and uncomfortable. Maria's team members slowly returned to their workstations, but the easy camaraderie and professional confidence that had defined their unit seemed shaken. Several soldiers approached Maria quietly to express their support, but she simply nodded and redirected their attention back to their duties. She knew that dwelling on the humiliation would only make the situation worse for everyone involved. That evening, Maria sat alone in her quarters, staring at the field manual that had been so publicly criticized. She opened it and read through her own handwriting, remembering the circumstances that had led to each modification and improvement. These weren't random scribblings, as Hartwell had suggested, but carefully considered adaptations that had saved lives and improved efficiency in real combat situations. The contradiction between her actual accomplishments and the colonel's public assessment felt like a slap across everything she had worked to achieve. As she closed the manual and prepared for sleep, Maria made a decision that would change everything. She wouldn't simply accept this treatment and hope it passed. She wouldn't complain through official channels, knowing that would likely make her situation worse. Instead, she would find a way to demonstrate her true capabilities in a manner that could not be dismissed, misinterpreted, or diminished by anyone, regardless of their rank or family connections. The opportunity Maria had been waiting for arrived exactly 3 weeks after the humiliating inspection. The annual joint military exercise, called Operation Iron Shield, was scheduled to begin in 10 days, involving coordination between Fort Harrison and 3 other military installations across 2 states. This massive operation would test communication systems, logistics coordination, and crisis response capabilities under simulated combat conditions. Success required flawless execution of complex procedures, and any failures would be noted by high-ranking officials from the Pentagon who would be observing the exercise. Colonel Hartwell had been assigned as the overall communication coordinator for the exercise, a position that could make or break his career advancement. The responsibility was enormous, involving the management of secure satellite links, encrypted radio networks, emergency backup systems, and real-time data sharing between multiple command centers. Any communication breakdown during the exercise would reflect poorly on his leadership and could end his hopes for promotion to general. The week before the exercise, Hartwell's stress became visible to everyone on base. He held daily briefings that stretched for hours, micromanaging every detail and demanding redundant reports from department heads. His usual confident demeanor showed cracks as he struggled with the technical complexities of coordinating multiple communication networks simultaneously. Despite his years of military experience, his background had focused more on administrative duties and political relationships rather than hands-on technical operations. During one particularly tense briefing, Hartwell's limitations became apparent when he struggled to answer basic questions about satellite uplink procedures and backup communication protocols. The other officers in the room exchanged worried glances, knowing that their commanding officer might not possess the technical expertise required for such a critical assignment. The silence that followed his fumbled explanations was deafening, and everyone present understood the implications if these knowledge gaps persisted during the actual exercise. Maria watched these developments from her position as head of the base communication department. She had been excluded from the primary planning committee, despite her extensive experience and recent successful deployment. Hartwell had deliberately assigned her to handle routine maintenance duties during the exercise preparation, effectively sidelining her expertise when it was needed most. Her team members frequently approached her with technical questions that they couldn't get answered through official channels, and she provided guidance quietly, while maintaining the appearance of following her assigned duties. The real crisis emerged during the final preparation phase, when the primary communication officer assigned to the exercise, Major Peterson, suffered a severe allergic reaction and was hospitalized. This left a critical gap in the command structure just 4 days before Operation Iron Shield was scheduled to begin. Hartwell faced an impossible situation. He needed someone with advanced technical knowledge and practical experience to fill Peterson's role, but his pride prevented him from acknowledging Maria's qualifications after publicly humiliating her. Behind closed doors, Hartwell's aide suggested the obvious solution. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had more relevant experience than any other available officer and had successfully managed similar operations during her deployment. However, admitting that he needed Maria's expertise would essentially contradict everything he had said during the inspection 3 weeks earlier. It would be tantamount to admitting that his judgment had been wrong and that the soldier he had humiliated was actually more capable than he had claimed. For 3 days, Hartwell attempted to find alternative solutions. He contacted other bases requesting temporary personnel transfers, considered postponing portions of the exercise, and even explored the possibility of restructuring the communication protocols to reduce complexity. Each option presented significant problems and would likely attract negative attention from the observing officials. As the clock ticked toward the exercise start date, his options continued to diminish. Meanwhile, Maria continued her assigned maintenance duties while quietly observing the growing chaos in the command center. She could see the stress building among the communication staff as they struggled with technical challenges that she could solve easily. Her team members grew increasingly frustrated as they were asked to implement procedures that didn't make sense from a practical standpoint. The entire communication department was operating under unnecessary pressure because pride was preventing the utilization of available expertise. The breaking point came during a practice run held 2 days before the exercise. The communication systems experienced a cascade failure that took nearly 4 hours to resolve, during which time the entire mock operation was effectively paralyzed. The failure occurred because of a protocol conflict that Maria had identified weeks earlier but had not been consulted about. As technicians scrambled to diagnose and fix the problem, she quietly worked at her maintenance station, knowing exactly what needed to be done but having no authorization to intervene. After the practice disaster, Hartwell called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. The room was tense, as officers reported the various failures and attempted to assign blame. The Pentagon observers had already arrived on base and were asking pointed questions about the communication breakdowns they had witnessed. Postponing the exercise was no longer a viable option, and everyone in the room knew that similar failures during the actual operation would be catastrophic for all their careers. Finally, Major Williams, the base operations officer, spoke the words that everyone was thinking but nobody wanted to say. He pointed out that Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had the knowledge and experience needed to prevent these problems, and that excluding her from the operation was hampering their chances of success. Other officers nodded in agreement, despite knowing that challenging Hartwell's decision could have negative consequences for their own positions. Hartwell's face darkened as he realized that his authority was being questioned. But he also understood that his career hung in the balance. The Pentagon officials expected a flawless exercise, and delivering anything less would end his promotion hopes permanently. He found himself trapped between his pride and his professional survival, forced to choose between admitting his mistake or risking a disaster that would affect everyone present. The room fell silent as everyone waited for Hartwell's response. Outside, they could hear the sounds of troops preparing for the exercise, unaware of the leadership crisis developing in the command center. Maria continued her maintenance work in the communication bay, focused on her assigned duties while the debate about her capabilities continued without her knowledge. The irony was not lost on the officers present that they were discussing whether to utilize someone whose competence they had never actually doubted. After several long minutes, Hartwell made his decision. He would assign Maria to work under his direct supervision during the exercise, positioning it as an opportunity for her to learn from his expertise, rather than acknowledging her superior knowledge. This face-saving compromise would allow him to utilize her skills, while maintaining the appearance that he remained in complete control. It was a calculated move designed to solve his immediate problem, while preserving his authority and reputation. However, Hartwell had underestimated both the scope of the challenges ahead and Maria's determination to prove her worth definitively. He assumed that her role would be limited to following his instructions and implementing his decisions. He had no idea that he was about to give Maria exactly the platform she needed to demonstrate her true capabilities in a way that no one could ignore or diminish. The stage was set for a confrontation between pride and competence, with the success of the entire operation hanging in the balance. Operation Iron Shield began at exactly 0600 hours on a crisp Monday morning. The command center buzzed with controlled intensity as hundreds of personnel across 4 states coordinated the largest joint military exercise of the year. Pentagon officials occupied a dedicated observation area, taking detailed notes on every aspect of the operation. General Morrison, a 3-star general responsible for regional operations, personally oversaw the exercise with the expectation that it would demonstrate the readiness and capabilities of all participating units. Maria entered the command center wearing her perfectly pressed uniform and carrying the same field-worn manual that Colonel Hartwell had ridiculed weeks earlier. She had spent the weekend reviewing every technical specification and updating her notes with additional insights gained from recent equipment upgrades. Her team members watched her with a mixture of anticipation and concern, knowing that she was walking into a situation where any mistake would be magnified, and any success would likely be attributed to someone else. Hartwell positioned himself at the central command station, surrounded by multiple monitors displaying real-time data from all participating locations. His plan was simple: maintain visible control over all major decisions, while quietly relying on Maria to handle the technical details. He believed this arrangement would allow him to take credit for any successes while having someone else to blame if problems arose. His confidence had returned somewhat after convincing himself that his superior rank and experience would naturally guide the operation to success. The first few hours proceeded smoothly, as routine communications flowed between the various installations. Standard protocols handled normal traffic efficiently, and Hartwell began to relax as he observed the steady progress indicators on his displays. He made several announcements over the communication network, ensuring that his voice was clearly identified as the exercise coordinator. The Pentagon observers noted the apparent calm and organization, making positive comments about the professional execution they were witnessing. However, Maria noticed subtle warning signs that others missed. The satellite uplink showed minor fluctuations that suggested potential stability issues. Radio frequencies experienced occasional interference that indicated possible equipment conflicts. Data transmission rates fluctuated in patterns that suggested network congestion was building gradually. These individual problems were not yet critical, but Maria recognized the early stages of a cascade failure that could bring down the entire communication system. When Maria attempted to bring these concerns to Hartwell's attention, he dismissed them without proper consideration. In front of the observing officials, he stated that minor fluctuations were normal during large exercises, and that his experience allowed him to distinguish between routine variations and actual problems. He instructed Maria to focus on her assigned monitoring duties and leave the strategic decisions to him. His response was delivered with enough condescension to make clear that he viewed her warnings as unnecessary anxiety from someone lacking his level of expertise. The situation deteriorated rapidly during hour 4 of the exercise. A scheduled equipment test at Fort Bradley caused a power surge that affected their primary satellite dish. Normally, this would trigger an automatic switchover to backup systems, but the backup protocols had been incorrectly configured during the preparation phase. Instead of seamlessly maintaining communication, the system began cycling between failed attempts to reconnect, creating a feedback loop that progressively destabilized the entire network. Within 15 minutes, communication failures cascaded across the entire exercise network. Fort Bradley lost contact with the command center entirely. Fort Stevens experienced intermittent connectivity that made coordination impossible. The naval station reported complete radio silence on 3 primary frequencies. Most critically, the emergency backup systems that should have prevented these failures were either malfunctioning or had been improperly activated in the wrong sequence. Hartwell stared at his displays in growing panic as red warning indicators multiplied across every screen. The Pentagon observers leaned forward in their chairs, asking pointed questions about response protocols and recovery timelines. General Morrison's expression shifted from mild interest to serious concern as he realized that the exercise was failing in real time. The professional reputation of everyone present was crumbling with each passing minute of continued communication breakdown. For 20 crucial minutes, Hartwell attempted to manage the crisis using standard procedures that were clearly inadequate for the complex system failures occurring. He issued commands that couldn't be transmitted, requested status reports that couldn't be received, and tried to implement backup procedures that had already been compromised. His visible frustration grew as each attempted solution failed to improve the situation. The command center atmosphere became tense and uncomfortable as staff members watched their leader struggle with problems beyond his technical understanding. Finally, with the exercise on the verge of complete collapse and the Pentagon observers preparing to file devastating reports, Maria stepped forward. She didn't ask for permission or wait for authorization. She simply moved to the primary control station and began implementing the emergency recovery procedures that she had learned during actual combat situations. Her movements were confident and precise, drawing on experience gained during real crises, where failure meant life or death, rather than merely career embarrassment. Maria's first action was to shut down the malfunctioning automatic systems that were creating the cascade failures. She recognized that the computers were trapped in error loops that would continue until manually interrupted. While technicians had been trying to fix the automated systems, she understood that the immediate priority was stopping the deterioration and establishing basic communication links using manual procedures. Her field manual, marked with real-world modifications, provided the exact steps needed for emergency system recovery. Working with her team members who knew her methods and trusted her judgment, Maria began rebuilding the communication network from the ground up. She bypassed the corrupted protocols and established direct links using frequency combinations that she had tested during her deployment. Within 10 minutes, she had restored basic contact with all 4 installations. Within 30 minutes, she had full communication restored across all networks with better stability than had existed before the crisis began. The command center watched in amazed silence as Maria systematically resolved every technical problem that had overwhelmed them for the previous hour. Her explanations were clear and confident as she detailed each step to the observing officials, demonstrating not only practical competence but also the ability to teach others. General Morrison asked detailed technical questions that she answered without hesitation, showing depth of knowledge that impressed even the experienced Pentagon observers. During the final 6 hours of the exercise, Maria maintained flawless communication coordination, while simultaneously training other personnel in the improved procedures she had implemented. Her modifications actually enhanced the exercise beyond its original scope, allowing for additional scenarios that tested capabilities more thoroughly than had been planned. The operation concluded with commendations for innovation and excellence, drawing praise from officials who had arrived expecting to witness routine competence but instead observed exceptional problem-solving under pressure. Colonel Hartwell remained mostly silent during the final phases of the exercise, realizing that any attempt to reassert his authority would only highlight his earlier failures. The contrast between his panic during the crisis and Maria's calm expertise had been witnessed by everyone present, including officials whose opinions would determine his future career prospects. His plan to take credit for success while avoiding blame for failure had backfired completely, leaving him exposed as someone whose rank exceeded his actual capabilities. In the weeks following Operation Iron Shield, Maria received official commendations from both General Morrison and the Pentagon observers. Her innovative communication procedures were documented and distributed to other installations as new standard protocols. She was recommended for immediate promotion and consideration for advanced leadership training. Most significantly, Her field manual was officially adopted as supplementary training material, transforming the resource that Hartwell had mocked into recognized military doctrine. The story of what happened during Operation Iron Shield spread throughout the military community, becoming a powerful example of how true leadership and competence can emerge from unexpected places. Maria never spoke publicly about the humiliation she had endured, or her feelings about Hartwell's treatment of her. Instead, she allowed her actions and results to speak for themselves, demonstrating that the best response to unfair criticism is simply to prove it wrong through undeniable excellence. Colonel Hartwell's promotion to general was quietly postponed indefinitely. While he retained his current rank and position, his reputation within military leadership circles had been permanently damaged. The exercise had revealed the difference between inherited authority and earned respect, showing that titles and family connections cannot substitute for genuine knowledge and practical experience. Maria's triumph was not just personal vindication but a reminder that merit and competence will ultimately prevail over privilege and prejudice in situations where real performance matters.